Good afternoon and welcome to St Peter Mancroft. I'm Fiona Howarth, the Associate Priest, and I'm delighted today to welcome Tish Kirkham, who is going to talk to us about bees and pollination. This is part of our regular series of live-streamed talks, and you're very welcome to continue looking around the church while we have our conversation. So, I'm going to start by asking Tish how you started beekeeping.
Okay, I started about 7 years ago. I'm a member of Marpet Community Garden, which is at Cossey, and I was walking around and I found we're looking at various things. We were actually looking at blackthorn, and he was talking about cutting it back. And I said, well, don't cut it all back because it's good for bees. And so he said, oh, do you like bees? And I said, yes, because I'd liked bees since I was a child. And so he said, well, would you like to keep bees here? And I said, yes. And he said, well, go online, find a course, book yourself on a course. So there was none in Norwich, it was June, and they were all full up. And so I actually went to the Lake District, got on a course. So that was June. By July, we had our first hive of bees.
Oh, gosh.
Which was amazing. So it was a 2-day course. And so we had the bees, and so that was learning on the job very fast. And then the week before Christmas, someone stole our bees.
Oh.
The hive and all the bees in it. Anyway, people rallied round and helped, so we got going again the next year. And we've also been developing the forest gardens part of Marpet Community Garden. It's on the 7-acre site, so I've had the opportunity to actually think about planting for the bees as well.
Oh,
which
lovely.
is very useful.
Where do you get bees from if you start beekeeping?
Different ways. What we did with the first bees, we bought what's called a nuke, which means a nucleus, as in a small number,
Right.
from a local beekeeper. So we bought the hive and all the equipment we needed, and the bees, and then they'll build up. So that's one way of doing it. People collect swarms, so you can get a swarm of bees for free. Once you've got some bees, when your own bees want to swarm, there's ways of preventing them swarming, which actually means increasing. So where you've got one colony, you'll then have two.
Right.
So you can build your own up, or you can actually breed your bees, you can do it deliberately.
Okay.
So once you've got some bees, you end up with more bees, hopefully.
Right. Oh, that's good.
Yes.
Thank you. So how has beekeeping changed your perceptions about honeybees and about pollination?
Well, the first thing, it's made me more observant. And now if I'm walking anywhere, if there's a bush, a tree, shrubs, flowers, and if there's an insect moving on it, I notice. And I home in and I'm looking, is that a honeybee, is it a wasp, what is it? And I'm watching. So that's a big thing. And I've noticed very much that bees don't just, we think of bees foraging on flowers, but trees are just as important. And then the other thing, as a beekeeper, I have to be very aware of the nutritional needs of my honeybees. One thing is they need they're out foraging on flowers, so what they bring home to the home to the hive, they bring water, they need water, everything needs water. But the two main nutritional things are nectar, which is the carbohydrate for energy, and as they collect the nectar from the flowers, and on the way home they're adding enzymes, and then they get it in the hive and they have to reduce the water content. So they hang the drops up within the hive in the cells, or they put the drop on the tongue and then run it backwards and forwards to reduce the water content. And then when it's ripe, when it's ready, they store it in the cells. If they don't reduce the water content, it would ferment, so they've got to bring it down.
Gosh.
The other thing they're after is pollen.
Yeah.
Pollen is the protein, so they need that to feed the young, build the body's maintenance.
Gosh, that's fascinating.
And the other thing is they need, that I'm very aware of is that bees need nectar and pollen all year round. From January, February, when the snowdrops come out, on a mild day they'll be out. And sort of all the way through from early spring right through to late autumn, they need to be out foraging. And then there's just about sort of 3 months during the winter when they won't go out very much.
Right.
So that's very important to maintain the flowers all the way through that long period.
Do they need feeding at all if we had a prolonged period of snow?
It depends very much. Partly it depends on how you and I manage them. So, for instance, commercial beekeepers, when they take off the honey, they may take as much as they can, and then they're making up the stores. They're giving the bees sugar syrup, which is a mixture of sugar and water, which the bees then reduce the water content again and store it for the winter. The reason they make honey is store it for the winter. It's very much a judgment. So what we usually do, we take off the honey maybe in June, maybe beginning of August, and then after that, whatever they can collect is for the bees.
Right.
And it depends very much on the weather, if they can get out. And if you have a bad autumn, you may need to feed them more. If it's very good autumn, maybe you don't need to feed them. And again, sometimes we need to feed them in June. There can be a June gap when they're not finding very much to forage on.
Thank you. And how do honeybees locate flowers?
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
People have heard of the waggle dance. So what happens, the scouts go out. So a proportion of the bees in a hive, in a colony, will be scouts. And they go out looking for a patch of flowers. And again, it can be flowers on the ground, or it can be a lime tree. And when they find a good source, they fly back to the hive. And bees are very conscious of where the sun is, and they know where the sun is even if it's behind a cloud, because they can sense ultraviolet rays. And then, so they're aware of the angle between the sun and where the flowers are. And then in the hive, in the dark of the hive, they maintain that angle between the sun is the same as the vertical, upwards. And that angle determines the direction they dance in. So they have a dance, it's called waggle dance. They go in waggling, they waggle their abdomen, going waggling, and then they go round in a figure of 8. And then they waggle again, and they go round in a figure of 8. And other bees will be watching them. And they'll offer a sample of the nectar they brought home, so the bees know what it tastes like, what it smells like, which way it is, the direction, and how far straight the waggle bit goes is how far away it is.
Right.
And once they've got that in their heads, off they'll go.
Gosh.
And then when they're above the flowers, they'll sense it. And they'll go down and they'll work that patch of flowers, which is amazing, because they're not shown, they follow them out. And if you're experienced and you watch that, you can actually find out where they're going and find
Right.
it.
Gosh, that's extraordinary.
It is, it is.
So what are bees doing at this time of the year?
They're very busy. I've noticed, I heard a buzzing in an ivy bush, and I looked, and it was full of honeybees foraging on the little ivy flowers, and also a lot of other pollinators, bumblebees, solitary bees, parasitic wasps, a lot of other pollinators. So if on a day like this, they're out, they're still desperately trying to get in the last stores for the winter. So in the winter, they don't hibernate. What they do, they cluster around the queen. So they have the queen and any eggs and young that they keep warm. And they reduce their numbers, so not so many workers going through the winter. The drones are the males, and they've been chucked out.
Right.
They're not going to carry the males through the winter.
Right.
So they keep the queen warm. They make us cluster around her, and if it's very cold, they'll cluster tighter. and they'll dislocate their wing muscles and they'll shiver to make warmth.
Right.
And then if it's if it's milder, they loosen up. If it's very mild, they go out on what we call a cleansing height, because they won't mess the hive.
Oh, gosh.
So they go out.
Right.
So that's now. Then they'll go through the winter. There'll be young bees. The queen may have a break in egg laying, but she's probably laying again by about January. So that time of year is very important. From February, March, early on, they need pollen. And they get that from the willows. Young bulbs are very important. So they're building up. And then they go into, a bit later in the spring, they'll be on the apples, on the soft fruits, flowers. Then we sometimes, I said, we get a bit of a gap in June between the spring flowers and the summer flowers.
Right.
And then through the summer they'll be collecting, they're building up the numbers, always with winter in view. And the reason they store honey, as I said, is to see them through the winter.
Right. Gosh. And what are the main challenges facing bees?
Well, it's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone knows bees are in trouble. And I mean, I'm talking mostly about honeybees because that's what I know most. But the single greatest thing, I think, is actually loss of forage, so loss of flowers. In terms of, since the Kew Gardens have done research, since the 1930s, we've lost 97% of our wildlife meadows.
Gosh.
Which is enormous.
Yes.
And then in hedgerows are very good. And all through the 60s, the government was actually subsidising farmers to grub up the hedgerows. So that sort of thing. Monocrops. So if you may have a wonderful field of oilseed rape, that's fine for a few weeks. But then they need something else. As I was saying, they need all the year round. So lack of, and then grass fields, there was very much what's called improved grassland, which is they dug up the meadows and planted grass again. So that's one of the main things. Then there's pesticides and also herbicides.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, I mean, we've had some pesticides have been banned, but also if they come across pesticides and herbicides, they're actually worse than either on their own. It's, they work together. So that's really important. And then exotic diseases. So one of the biggest problems for bees in Europe and also America has been a little mite called a varroa mite, and that's killed a lot of hives. And it's a mite that was endemic to Asian bees, Apis cerana, and it jumped species to European Apis mellifera. And the Asian bees know how to deal with it, but our bees don't.
Right.
They are learning. In the wild, they are adapting. So that's really big. So that's something that, you know, it's human interference, moving them about, it's done that. Also, there was pests like the Asian hornet, which is really devastating colonies throughout France. And we've had them coming into England over the last 4 or 5 years, but so far it's been controlled. But they're very, in the Channel Islands, they're really bad. So diseases enabled by people, they come in, if you're camping and you bring an Asian hornet back in your tent,
Right.
without knowing, things like that, or with pottery or wood or moving plants about. So that's bad. And then the other thing is climate change. And I mean, there's sort of the really extreme things like the fires in Australia, the floods in Europe, I mean, just destroys everything. But without going that far, because of the uncertainty of the weather, extreme weather, if it's very cold and windy, they can't get out. If it's too dry in the summer, then the flowers won't be producing nectar. The bees, I mean, everything they do depends on wax. They make wax. And if it gets too hot, I mean, the wax will melt if it's really hot. Yes. But they have to maintain the temperature. And the other thing is climate change is changing what plants will thrive here. Especially with other pollinators, even more than honeybees, some pollinators are absolutely specific to what plants they're on. Honeybees, they don't care if it's a native species or non-native species, as long as they can access it and get it. And we can always help them. Nevertheless, climate change it won't just sort of change the plants that will thrive here. It will also reduce how well they do. Right. So that's all going to be more. It is and will be more challenging to bees and pollinators.
Right. Thank you. And what can we do to help bees?
Plant flowers.
Yes.
Plant trees, plant shrubs, plant climbers, plant everywhere. Plant in your garden, plant on the balcony, plant in the verges, as much as you can. Just a lot of planting. Don't use pesticides, don't use herbicides. There's other ways of controlling plants. If you want to know how to control plants and you don't weeds and you don't know, then find out about organic gardening. There are methods. When you decide what to plant, just have a look at the labels. And whether it's a plant or whether it's seeds, they have the pictures of good pollinators. So that can help. And then I mentioned observing when I started. Do the same thing. Look when you're walking about. See what bees and other pollinators are on, if they're on that. I saw some on a cotoneaster, and I didn't know they like that. I thought, and also, don't be afraid to try different plants, see what does well. Just planting, looking.
I'm going to go home and pay attention to our ivy now, because it hadn't occurred to me that there might be bees on it. But thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. This has been really fascinating. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add before we draw to a close.
I don't think so. It's just, it's down to all of us, I think.
Yes.
We can all play it. We may think, in the face of climate change, we can feel absolutely helpless.
Yeah.
But we can do very small things which do make a difference.
Yeah. We are planting a wildflower part in the churchyard, so we're working on that.
Oh, and another thing, word for dandelions.
Oh, yes.
I love dandelions. Yeah. They look beautiful,
yes.
And they've got a very long flowering season, so they're excellent. And I mean, there's advice to grow if you have a lawn, to grow part of it as wild. But also in the lawn itself, let daisies grow, let dandelions grow, let little flowers grow. You can still sit on it, the kids can play on it, and it looks nice.
Yes, it does. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating. I wanted to end just by reading a short excerpt from a very ancient Christian hymn called the Exultet, which is sung on Easter Day when it's still dark as we light the Easter candle. And I hope when I read it, you understand why I'm reading it. And it goes like this. Therefore, Heavenly Father, in this our Easter joy, accept our sacrifice of praise, your church's solemn offering. This wax, the work of bees, and the hands of your ministers. Glory to you forever. As we gaze upon the splendour of this flame, fed by wax, conceived by Mother Bee, Grant that this Easter candle may make our darkness light, for Christ the morning star has risen in glory. Every year when I hear that, it moves me, because they're right at the heart of our Easter celebration, is this celebration of the bee and all we owe to them, because they are so important for our food and for the flowers that we appreciate and the fruit, and it's just fascinating. So I'm so grateful for you two coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.